There is a moment in the book of Revelation that most modern Christians read past without flinching. The text describes a leader whose image is everywhere, a man whose face cannot be escaped, whose name is stamped onto the currency the world transacts in, a man who receives honor from priests, who demands gold, who survives what should have killed him and calls his survival proof of divine selection. The text was written almost 2,000 years ago, and the men who wrote it were not predicting one specific person. They were describing a pattern, a structural arrangement of power, image, religion, and money that has appeared again and again throughout history, each time more refined, each time more difficult to recognize, because each generation believes itself too sophisticated to fall for the version that snared the last. I want to walk you through 5 markers, 5 specific structural conditions the early church identified as the unmistakable architecture of Antichrist power. And I want you to look at the world around you, honestly, with the eyes of a man who is not afraid to see what he is looking at, and ask yourself how many of these markers are currently present in the country you live in. I am not going to tell you what to conclude. I am going to lay out the evidence. The conclusion is yours. The first marker is the omnipresent image. The early Christians lived in a Roman Empire saturated with the face of the emperor. Coins, statues, banners, temple altars, doorways. The image was not decoration. The image was a theology. To see the emperor everywhere was to be reminded that the emperor was everywhere, and that his power was not merely political, but spiritual. The Christians refused to burn incense to the imperial image, and they were killed for that refusal. The refusal was not pride. The refusal was an act of theological precision. They understood that when a single living man's face becomes ubiquitous in the visual culture of a civilization, something has shifted in that civilization's relationship to the sacred. The face begins to compete with the divine. It does not have to claim divinity, it only has to be everywhere. The omnipresence does the theological work on its own. Look around you. Look at the banners hung on federal buildings. Look at the passport designs. Look at the proposed coins. Look at the statues being erected on golf courses. Ask yourself how the first Christians would have read this pattern. Ask yourself honestly. The second marker is the merger of religious authority with political power. The early church understood that the moment a priest blesses a king, 2 things happen simultaneously. The king receives spiritual legitimacy he has not earned, and the priest receives political proximity that will eventually corrupt the priesthood. The book of Revelation describes this merger with a precise and terrifying image, a great whore who rides upon the beast. The image is not subtle. The religious institution mounts the political power and rides it for as long as the beast will tolerate her weight. And then the beast devours her, because the beast was never her ally. The beast was using her. Every collapsing empire in recorded history has produced this exact scene. Rome had it, Byzantium had it, the Holy Roman Empire had it, and the United States, the nation that was founded on a constitutional separation between these 2 powers, is now producing the spectacle of clergy gathering at the feet of gilded statues to bless living politicians, while crypto speculators sell tokens beside them. The fathers would have torn their garments. The fathers would have wept. And the modern church, by and large, posts encouraging quotes about staying positive. The third marker is the commodification of the sacred. There is a story in the Gospels that almost every Christian knows by heart, but very few apply to their own lives. Jesus enters the temple. He sees the money changers. He sees the men selling doves at inflated prices to the poor who have come to make their offerings. And he does something the modern, soft gospel version of Christianity cannot reconcile with its image of him. He braids a whip from cords. He overturns the tables. He drives them out with violence and fury, and he says, "You have made my Father's house a den of thieves." The money changers were not gambling in the temple. They were performing a religiously sanctioned commercial activity. They were enabling worship. They had paperwork. They had relationships with the priests. And Jesus drove them out anyway, because he understood the deepest truth about the sacred. The moment a holy thing becomes useful, it has already ceased to be holy. When a Bible is sold for $60 with a politician's name printed on the cover, when a statue is funded by speculators promoting a meme currency, when prayer becomes a marketing event for an asset class, the temple has been entered. The whip has not yet been braided, but the money changers are already at the tables, and they are smiling for the cameras. The fourth marker is the manufacture of false martyrdom. This one is the most psychologically sophisticated, and it is the one most modern Christians have completely missed. The Antichrist figure described in Scripture is not a man who claims to be evil. He is a man who claims to have been chosen by God through suffering. He has survived assassination attempts. He has been persecuted. He has been hated by the right people. And he frames each of these events as proof of divine election. The early church warned that this would be a defining feature of the false Christ. Not that he would deny God, but that he would weaponize the language of God to sanctify his own ambition. He would point to his survival as evidence. He would point to his enemies as confirmation. He would gather around him a class of clergymen who would echo the narrative back to him until it became the unquestioned framing of his entire political identity. Read your Gospels carefully. Jesus did not point to his survival. Jesus walked toward his crucifixion. The false Christ inverts the pattern. He celebrates his survival. He raises his fist after the bullet misses. He calls it providence. And the crowd, unfamiliar with the actual texture of the gospel they claim to believe, calls it the same. The fifth marker is the one I have saved for last, because it is the gravest. The fifth marker is the blindness of the faithful. The book of Revelation does not describe a world in which the people are deceived by force. The people are deceived because they want to be. They have grown comfortable. They have grown tired of vigilance. They have confused political affiliation with spiritual identity for so long that they can no longer separate the two. And so when the man they have chosen as their political champion begins to display every structural marker the apostles warned them about, they do not see it. They cannot see it. To see it would require dismantling decades of identity. It would require admitting that they have been participating in a pattern the apostles told them, in writing, would come. And admitting that is too costly. So they look at the gilded statue, and they call it honor. They look at the face on the currency, and they call it patriotism. They look at the clergy bending the knee, and they call it revival. They look at the merger of religion and political power, and they call it victory. And somewhere, in the silence of their own private prayers, a small voice asks them whether this is really what Christ described. And they push the voice down, and they go back to the rally, and they buy the Bible with the politician's name on the cover, and the marker is complete. I want to be precise about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not telling you that any single living man is the Antichrist. The Bible does not authorize that level of confidence, and any preacher who claims it is selling you something. What I am telling you is that the pattern, the structural pattern the apostles described in writing, is fully visible right now in the country you live in. Every one of the 5 markers is present. The omnipresent image, the merger of religious and political power, the commodification of the sacred, the manufacture of false martyrdom, and the blindness of the faithful who will not see what they are looking at. This is not prophecy fulfilled. This is prophecy describing a recurring shape, and the shape is in your living room. If you are a Christian, your task is not to panic. Your task is to see clearly, to refuse the gilding, to refuse the merger, to refuse the comfortable lie that political victory is spiritual victory. Your task is to become the kind of person who would have refused to burn the incense in Rome, who would have walked away from the table when the money changers set up shop, who would have remained silent while the clergy cheered the new emperor. Your task is to be the small voice in your own private prayers that refuses to be pushed down. The Stoics called this clarity. The Ethiopian fathers called it discernment. The apostles called it the spirit of truth. By any name, it is the only thing standing between you and the marker that swallows everyone else. Build the inner fortress, refuse the gold, and subscribe if you are ready to see what most will not.